Welcome to the Vatican Museums, situated within Vatican City and made up of 26 museums, 54 galleries, and countless exemplary works of art such as Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, Raphael's The School of Athens, Laocoon and his sons, and this pinecone. Like most, you probably haven't heard of that last one, but at 13 feet tall, it certainly makes an impression, if a perplexing one, on visitors to the Vatican. We are currently standing in the Cortile della Pigna, or the Pine Court, and we are looking at the heavily oxidized bronze of the Pigna, or pinecone, whose history ties in with that of the Vatican and its museums. Scholars think it was likely created around the 1st century BCE, when the pinecone was embedded within pre-Christian iconography, having associations with Bacchus, which also linked it to fertility, an association that remains today and that has been generalized into a symbol of luck. In the 8th century, this pinecone arrived initially at St. Peter's Basilica until it was moved in the 17th century. Like the rest of the museum, it is an amalgamation of different objects and different powerful figures with the peacock accents taken from Hadrian's mausoleum, now known as Castel San Angelo, the base on which it stands from the Baths of Nero in the 3rd century, and the stairs flanking it designed by Michelangelo. Although we do not know for certain where the pinecone came from, the pre-Christian associations with the symbol speak to the Catholic Church's transformation of such objects and iconography for their own purposes. Within the museum, the Vatican displays many pre-Christian sculptures and commissioned art, even takes inspiration from pre-Christian mythology. Examples of this, notably the Hall of Muses, can be found in the building behind the pinecone, the Museo Pio-Clementino.
The Museo Pio-Clementino is the oldest of the Vatican Museums and was formally founded by Pope Clement XIV in 1771. However, Pio-Clementino's collection first coalesced 2 centuries earlier through Pope Julius II's collection of classical sculpture, much of which was excavated and collected in the 16th century. Subsequent excavations and classical sculpture collections were added to Pope Julius II's original collection, thus forming the 12-room collection that occupies the space today. The Pio-Clementino can be accessed from the octagonal court, which houses canonical classical sculptures such as Laocoon and his sons and the Apollo Belvedere, both of which came from Pope Julius II's aforementioned collection. The Laocoon in particular is a keystone of the Vatican Museum collection, as it was one of the first works put on public display in the Vatican, predating the formal establishment of the Pio-Clementino Museum by over 200 years. It was discovered and excavated from the Esquiline Hill in the early 16th century and was bought by Pope Julius II. Pope Julius then brought Michelangelo to analyze the work. It is likely that this interaction between Michelangelo and the Laocoon sculpture influenced his own art. The immediacy and ephemeral nature of the sculpture's composition, with its meticulously rendered clenched musculature and dramatic twisted contortions of the human body, for example, can be observed in the likes of Michelangelo's David in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Once visitors leave the octagonal court, they enter the rest of the Pio-Clementino, which houses the Belvedere torso, yet another iconic work owned by the Vatican Museums.
The Belvedere torso is a fragment of a statue found in Rome at the end of the 15th century. The sculpture, dating from the 1st century BCE, offers us something that we are not always afforded when looking at ancient sculpture in the signature of the artist. The piece was signed prominently by the Athenian sculptor Apollonius on the sculpture's base. The actual identity of the figure has been debated for centuries, but the most accepted theory is that it presents Ajax sculpted contemplating his suicide. It is also said by some scholars that the Sibyls in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling were modeled after the Belvedere torso.
The building site of the Vatican Museum originated as a guest house built beside St. Peter's Basilica in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. It was somewhat abandoned by the 12th century and experienced several temporary renovations until the mid-15th century, when it was converted into a palace by Pope Nicholas V. The Sistine Chapel was added to this palace in the late 15th century by Pope Sixtus IV. In the early 16th century, Pope Julius II commissioned architect Donato Bramante to connect the palace to the nearby Belvedere courtyard, creating the massive building complex that we know today as the Vatican Museums. Since then, renovations and additions have continuously been added to the Vatican Museums, including a dedicated space for modern and contemporary art in the 1970s. This evolutionary building history has thus dictated the viewing experience for the millions of visitors that visit the Sistine Chapel every year, as they are directed through the Sistine route, which flows through Bramante's west corridor and includes the Gallery of the Candelabra, the Gallery of Tapestries, the Gallery of Maps, the Raphael Rooms, the Borgia Rooms, and the Contemporary Art Collection. Only after viewing the rich variety of works along this route, which range from 16th century tapestries to drawings by Matisse, can one view Michelangelo's monumental Sistine Chapel and the Last Judgment. Viewers are primed then to make visual connections and links between the Sistine Chapel and other works in the museum's collection, such as the Laocoon and the Belvedere torso. In doing so, the Sistine route paints the Catholic Church as an institution which is deeply embedded within the history of some of the most advanced civilizations in antiquity, lending it great legitimacy and even a sense of divine privilege.
While the Sistine is rightfully one of the most popular and well-known attractions at the Vatican Museums, there are several other masterpieces that don't receive as much mainstream attention. Throughout the museum, you will see various floor mosaics, a prized find in pontifical archaeological excavations. Antiquities, specifically those found in these excavations, are now housed in the Museo Gregoriano Profano. One such discovery comes from a dining room floor of an Aventine Hill villa in Rome during the reign of Emperor Hadrian from 117 to 138 CE. An asàrotos òikos mosaic, a decorative theme invented in the 2nd century BCE by Sosos of Pergamon. The name translates to unswept floor and depicts a floor covered with rubbish of a banquet. Only surviving in part, the mosaic is made of glass and colored marble tesserae. Here, fruit, bones, and even a mouse eating a walnut shell can be seen with color used to create shadows, giving the illusion of three-dimensionality. The artist has signed their name Heraclitus, and other designs appear across the mosaics, including theatrical masks, ritual objects, and a Nile scene. Mosaics such as this were exclusively for the elite, meant to spark discourse and remind of life's brevity.
Another interesting piece in the Vatican Museum's collection is Vincent van Gogh's version of the Pietà. The oil painting housed in the Vatican Museum's contemporary art collection is rather small as far as depictions of the Pietà go, at 41.5 by 34 centimeters, but it is no less poignant or full of sorrow. The dramatic depiction of the tragic scene was inspired by a lithograph based on Eugene Delacroix's Pietà. Van Gogh painted the scene a few months before his death for his sister Willemijn, following another larger, brighter version of the piece, now housed in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which was painted for his brother Theo. The painting is an interesting view into Van Gogh's artistic process, being a mirror image of the scene as a result of copying the lithograph. The face of Christ within the work, too, provides space for contemplation of the nature of the piece, as some consider it a self-portrait of the artist, when it is in reality simply accurate to the model of the original.
Artistic inspiration, reinterpretation, and innovation is not limited to the likes of Van Gogh's Pietà. Upon exiting the Sistine Chapel, visitors are led towards the museum exit, which is beautifully framed by Giuseppe Momo's staircase, which he designed in 1932. This staircase is one of two staircases in the Vatican Museums called the Bramante staircase. Momo's staircase is a modern reinterpretation of Donato Bramante's original structure, which was designed in the early 16th century and is only accessible to visitors on guided tours. The original staircase has a double helix-shaped structure, so that upwards and downwards traffic is neatly separated into two separate staircases that intertwine as they spiral upwards. It is largely composed of granite columns that change in order as the staircase continues upwards, beginning with the Tuscan order and concluding with the Corinthian order. Momo's modern staircase borrows Bramante's double helix spiral structure, but renders it in an ornately decorated metal relief that features a rich profusion of imagery, including vine scrolls, papal symbols and shields, birds, angels, and pomegranates, just to name a few. The modern staircase thus pays homage to Donato Bramante's innovative design, while also translating that design into a different industrialized medium that reflects the newly urbanized and modernized Rome of the early 20th century. Both Bramante staircases, however, share an interest in conflating the old and the new, and the pre-Christian and the Christian, in order to establish a sense of divine legacy and historical legitimacy for the Catholic Church through the visual arts.
Before we conclude our visit, trying not to fall down the modern Bramante staircase on our way out, let's return to the Cortile della Pigna, where the ancient and contemporary quite literally face off. Across the courtyard, slowly rotates Italian artist Arnaldo Pomodoro's Sphere Within Sphere. Pomodoro said of his sculpture, timely in its introduction, the sculpture is intended as a metaphor for the coming of a new millennium, a promise for the rebirth of a less troubled and destructive world. The Vatican Museums themselves have experienced their own share of troubles. Napoleon stole the Laocoon and the Belvedere torso, among several other masterpieces, to build his Musée du Louvre. In addition, the institution itself also has historically participated in the collection of stolen or looted artifacts, from indigenous Canadian items to Peruvian mummies. The Vatican Museums, however, have begun the process of artifact repatriation and, in 2023, returned its Parthenon sculptures to Greece. The museum thus changes through troubled times, both rooting itself in the past of the pinecone and growing towards a future of sphere within sphere.